The auction yard was quiet except for the sound of the auctioneer calling out the last few items. Most buyers had already left. Rows of containers stood in the sun, each one filled with whatever the previous owner had left behind. Some were filled with junk, others with forgotten treasures. But one container sat at the far end, unclaimed, its metal surface scarred with strange markings. No one wanted it. No one even stepped close to it. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he called out for bids, but the crowd avoided it as if it carried bad luck. Ethan stood with his hands in his pockets, watching from a distance. He had come looking for tools, maybe some machinery he could repair and resell. But the moment his eyes landed on that container, something in him tightened. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a pull, a strange whisper in his mind telling him to take it. The auctioneer sighed, ready to close the bidding without a sale. Ethan raised his hand. A few heads turned in surprise. No one else countered. The gavel fell, and the container was his. The metal was cold under his fingers as he approached. The surface was dented, the locks reinforced with heavy steel. His friend Marco muttered under his breath, asking why he'd waste money on something no one wanted. Ethan didn't answer. The lock clicked open with an effort, the sound echoing in the still air. He gripped the handle, pulled the door open, and a wave of cool, stale air brushed past his face. Then he froze. Something moved in the shadows. Her eyes caught the light first sharp, glowing, and unblinking. She stepped forward slowly, her skin a deep, vivid purple that seemed almost metallic under the sunlight. Tall, athletic, and wrapped in dark straps and gold accents, she moved like a predator studying her prey. Around her wrists were thick cuffs, broken at the edges as if she had torn them off with her own strength. Behind her, in the dim container space, were chains hanging loosely from the walls. She looked at Ethan, her gaze cutting through him like a blade. Marco took a step back, whispering for Ethan to close the door. But Ethan didn't move. He could feel the tension in the air. Every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to spring. She spoke, her voice low and edged with warning, in a language he didn't understand. The sound made his pulse quicken. Even without knowing the words, he understood the message. She wasn't asking for help. She was telling him she would fight if she had to. In one swift motion, she stepped fully into the sunlight. Her shadow stretched across the ground, and Ethan noticed the strange marks along her arms, scars, symbols, and patterns burned into her skin. Her eyes darted around, taking in the yard, the people, the open sky. She wasn't afraid. She was calculating. And when those eyes returned to him, Ethan realized something. She wasn't looking at him like a rescuer. She was measuring him, deciding if he was worth sparing. A worker from the auction yard shouted something about security and moved toward them. She turned her head sharply, and Ethan saw a flash of movement. In the blink of an eye, the man was on the ground, gasping, clutching his chest. She hadn't even looked like she tried. The force in her movements was terrifying and graceful all at once. The yard went silent, everyone frozen in place. Marco cursed under his breath. Ethan stayed still, feeling every instinct scream at him. To be careful, she took a step closer to Ethan. He could see now that her hair, dark and braided, carried thin metallic threads woven through it. The gold ornaments at her waist weren't decorative, they were weighted, balanced, and shaped to be weapons. Her breathing was steady, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. Without breaking that gaze, she pointed back to the dark interior of the container, then at herself, and finally at him. Ethan didn't know exactly what it meant, but his gut told him he had just inherited more than a container. He had inherited a problem, a dangerous one. For a long moment, neither moved. The hot wind carried the smell of dust and rust between them. Somewhere in the distance, a machine clanged against metal. And in that strange, charged silence, Ethan realized he wasn't the one deciding what happened next. She was *the yard. Workers stayed frozen, unsure if they should approach or run. The woman stood tall, her stance steady, her gaze locked on Ethan. There was no fear in her eyes, only the sharp calculation of someone used to being in control. Ethan could feel his pulse in his ears, every instinct telling him that this was not someone he could treat carelessly. Marco whispered from behind him, urging him to step away, but Ethan's feet didn't move. Something about her presence held him in place. She took another step forward, and he caught a faint shimmer on her skin as the sunlight shifted. The metallic threads in her braids caught the light, making her look both dangerous and impossibly striking. Her lips parted, and she spoke again in that same foreign language. Ethan still couldn't understand her words, but the tone was sharp and commanding. She gestured toward the container, then at the open yard, her movements precise. It was clear she was asking or ordering something, but her meaning was hidden in a language barrier neither of them could cross. One of the yard workers made the mistake of moving closer with a hand on his baton. Her head turned slightly, and before anyone could blink, she had stepped forward, twisted his arm, and sent him stumbling backward. She did it with a casual grace, as if swatting away a child. The man groaned on the ground, clutching his shoulder. She didn't even look back at him. Ethan realized that whatever she was far more dangerous than anyone here had guessed. She wasn't just strong, she was trained. Every movement spoke of discipline, skill, and a readiness to act without hesitation. He didn't know if she was a prisoner, a soldier, or something else entirely, but one thing was certain: she was not ordinary. She turned back to him, her eyes narrowing slightly. Then, slowly, she closed the distance between them until she was only a few feet away. Up close, Ethan could see the faint pattern of symbols etched into her skin, like tattoos. But older, more ancient. They seemed to carry a meaning, though he couldn't guess what. Her breath was calm, steady, and her gaze never wavered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt thick, heavy with the weight of unspoken questions. Then she pointed at the container again, stepped back, and gestured for him to follow. Ethan hesitated. Something about stepping into that dark space with her felt like stepping into a trap. But there was also a pull and unshakable sense that if he didn't follow, he might never understand why she was here. Marco hissed at him not to be stupid. But Ethan moved anyway. His boots scraped against the ground as he followed her to the container. She moved inside without hesitation, her long strides confident. The dim light revealed more details now. Chains hung from the walls, some broken, others still locked. Strange crates lined one side, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. And in the far corner, something covered with a dark cloth gave off a faint, unnatural glow. She stopped in front of it and looked at him, then back at the cloth. With a single smooth motion, she pulled it away. Beneath it was a strange device, unlike anything had ever seen. It was made of dark metal with lines of glowing blue running through it, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. Even without touching it, he could feel the faint vibration in the air around it. The woman placed her hand on it, and the glow brightened. The pulsing light reflected in her eyes as she turned back to him. She said something then, her voice softer but still carrying that edge of authority. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the message in her tone was clear. This was important, and it was not to be touched without her permission. She stepped closer, her expression hardening slightly, as if to test whether he understood the warning. Outside, Marco called for him again, but Ethan barely heard it. His focus was locked on her, on the strange connection forming in the silence between them. She might have been untamable, but in this moment, she was giving him a chance to stand beside her instead of against her. It was a dangerous offer, and one he didn't fully understand. But deep down, he knew refusing might be worse than accepting. The glow from the device filled the container with an otherworldly light. Ethan could feel the faint hum against his skin, like standing near an active generator. The alien woman's hand rested on it with a kind of reverence, as if it were more than just a machine. Her eyes studied him again, searching for something in his face. It was not curiosity. It was assessment. Marco's voice broke through from outside, sharper this time, tinged with worry. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, but the woman's sudden movement brought his attention snapping back. She stepped closer, closing the space between them in 2 swift strides. Her presence was overwhelming at such close range, the scent of metal and faint smoke clinging to her skin. Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, Ethan sensed the faintest hint of a question behind her intensity. She reached to her belt and unfastened a small flat object. It was no bigger than his palm, covered in the same markings as those etched into her skin. She held it out to him, her expression unreadable. Ethan hesitated, unsure if taking it would be seen as respect or insult. Finally, he extended his hand, and the cold metal pressed into his palm. The moment his skin touched it, a faint warmth spread through his hand, and the object lit with the same soft blue as the device. Her eyes widened slightly, and her lips parted in what might have been surprise. She stepped back, watching him with a sharper focus now. It was as if his reaction to the object had told her something she had not expected. She said something quickly, gesturing toward the device, then at him, then making a motion like 2 paths joining together. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was beginning to take shape in his mind. The object in his hand pulsed once, then again, syncing with the rhythm of the device in front of them. He could feel the connection between the two, as though they were part of a single system. The woman moved to one of the crates and began pulling out pieces of equipment, armored plates, tools, and strange cylindrical objects that gave off a faint glow. Each one looked designed for a purpose he couldn't guess, but the way she handled them made it clear she knew exactly what they were for. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Voices shouted in the yard, more than just Marco now. The woman froze, head tilting slightly as she listened. Then she moved quickly, placing herself between Ethan and the container's opening. Her stance shifted, one hand going to a blade at her side. The sudden tension in her posture sent a ripple of unease through him. Whoever was coming, she didn't intend to greet them peacefully. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. It wasn't Marco. 2 men in dark uniforms stepped inside, their weapons drawn. They spoke rapidly in a language Ethan could understand, ordering him to step away from her. But before he could answer, the woman moved. In a blur, she closed the distance, disarming one man with a twist of his wrist and sending the other staggering backward with a single kick. The thud of his body hitting the metal wall echoed through the container. Ethan's heart pounded as the first man scrambled for his weapon. The woman caught his arm again and shoved him outside, following him into the sunlight. Ethan stayed at the doorway, the object still warm in his palm. Shouts erupted across the yard as more uniformed men approached. Marco was nowhere to be seen. The alien woman didn't falter. She moved like a storm, cutting through the line of attackers with terrifying precision. Each strike was measured, efficient, and final. By the time the last man hit the ground, the yard was silent except for the ringing in Ethan's ears. She turned to face him, her breathing steady despite the fight. Her eyes scanned him once more before she walked back to the container. She motioned sharply for him to follow. Ethan glanced at the bodies on the ground, then at the open sky beyond. The yard's gates. He knew he could run now, leave all of this behind. But his feet moved toward her instead. Inside the container again, she took the object from his hand and placed it on the device. The glow deepened, and the hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor. She stepped back and spoke to him, slower this time, as if hoping he would understand. Her hand went to her chest, then to the device, and finally she pointed directly at him. He didn't know exactly what she was saying, but the meaning was clear enough, whatever this was. It had now bound them together. The device's hum filled the container like a living thing. Ethan could feel it in his chest, steady and strong, as if the machine had a heartbeat of its own. The alien woman stood beside it, her hands resting lightly on its surface. Her expression was unreadable, but her focus was absolute. She glanced at him once, then back at the glowing lines running across the metal. Ethan's instincts screamed that this was dangerous, but not in the way the fight outside had been. This danger was older, deeper, something that existed long before either of them had stepped into this yard. The warmth from the object still lingered in his palm, even though she had taken it away. He wondered if it was just a piece of alien technology, or if it was something far more personal to her. She moved suddenly, pulling a slim panel from the side of the device. Inside was a network of wires and crystal-like structures pulsing with light. She reached into a crate and pulled out a curved tool that seemed to shape itself to her grip. Without looking at him, she motioned for him to come closer. Her voice was firm when she spoke, as though she expected obedience without question. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. The glow from the open panel cast strange shadows across her face, highlighting the sharp angles of her jaw and the metallic threads in her braids. She pointed to a set of glowing lines inside the machine, then to his hands, then mimed connecting them. He hesitated, unsure if this was a test or a trap. But her gaze left no room for refusal. He reached in, the hum intensifying the moment his fingers touched the crystals. A shock of warmth ran up his arms, and for a brief second, images flashed through his mind stars, vast cities of alien design, and creatures unlike anything he had seen. He jerked back instinctively, but she caught his wrist, holding him steady. Her grip was strong, unyielding, yet not painful. She shook her head once, a silent command to continue. He swallowed hard and did as she directed. The glow in the lines deepened, shifting from blue to a vibrant gold. The hum became a low, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the walls of the container. She released his wrist, her attention now fixed entirely on the changing patterns of light. For the first time since meeting her, Ethan thought he saw something like approval in her eyes. Outside, the sound of distant engines rumbled through the air. The woman's head snapped up, and her eyes narrowed. She moved to the doorway, scanning the yard beyond. Ethan followed her gaze and saw dark shapes approaching vehicles, larger and heavier than the ones the uniformed men had arrived in. Whoever they were coming fast, and they were coming prepared. She turned back to him and spoke quickly, her words sharp and clipped. Even without understanding, Ethan could feel the urgency in her tone. She reached for one of the glowing cylinders she had pulled from the crate earlier and pressed it into his hand. Then she pointed toward the far side of the yard, where a section of the fence looked weaker. Her meaning was clear. If things went wrong, that was his way out. Ethan looked at the fence, then back at her. Every part of him wanted to take the chance to run, to get as far from this as possible. But something in her stance stopped him. She wasn't preparing to run. She was preparing to fight. And despite everything, despite the fact that she was untamable and dangerous, he didn't want to leave her to face it alone. The rumble of engines grew louder, and the first armored vehicle rolled into view. Men in heavy gear spilled out, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight. They moved with precision, fanning out to surround the yard. The alien woman stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade. The gold at her waist caught the light, a sharp glint that seemed to promise violence. Ethan tightened his grip on the cylinder, feeling its faint pulse against his skin. She glanced at him once, and in that look, Ethan understood something unspoken. Whatever was about to happen, their paths were now tied together. Whether by choice or by force, they were no longer separate in this fight. The hum of the device behind them seemed to grow louder, as if it too sensed what was coming. The armored vehicle stopped just outside the yard. engines idling with a low growl. Dust swirled around their wheels, curling into the hot air. The soldiers moved with precise coordination, their heavy boots striking the ground in unison. They carried weapons that looked far more advanced than what Ethan had seen earlier. The air felt charged, as if the heat itself had turned into something heavier. The alien woman's stance shifted slightly. Her blade was still sheathed, but her body was ready. Ethan could see the muscles in her arms tighten under the straps of her armor. She was reading the soldiers, measuring their formation, deciding which one to take first. He stayed near the doorway, the glowing cylinder in his hand feeling heavier than before. A voice rang out from the soldiers' line, sharp and commanding. The man who stepped forward wore darker armor than the rest, with a crest on his shoulder that glinted in the sunlight. His eyes locked onto the woman instantly. There was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke, and Ethan could tell from the tension in her jaw that she understood him. Whatever he said, it was not friendly. She answered in her own language, her voice low but steady. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their weapons tightening in their grips. Ethan's fingers flexed against the cylinder, unsure if it was a weapon or something else entirely. He glanced toward the fence she had pointed out earlier, but his feet stayed planted. If she fought, he knew he wouldn't be able to walk away. The commander raised a hand and the first wave moved in. The woman reacted instantly. Her blade flashed into the sunlight, a streak of gold and steel. She moved faster than Ethan could. Track, cutting through the line before they could even fire. 2 soldiers fell in the first breath, their weapons clattering against the ground. Her strikes were precise, every movement designed to end the fight quickly. Gunfire erupted from the far side, the sound cracking against the walls. Ethan ducked instinctively, but the woman didn't slow. She weaved through the incoming fire, closing the distance before the shooters could adjust. The hum of the device behind them seemed to rise in pitch, as if reacting to the chaos. Ethan felt the vibration through the metal under his boots. Steady and alive, a soldier broke away from the group, heading straight for the container. Ethan stepped into his path without thinking. The man raised his weapon, but Ethan swung the cylinder in his hand and struck it against the soldier's arm. A blinding arc of light burst from the contact, sending the man sprawling backward. Ethan stared at the cylinder in shock. It wasn't just a weapon. It was something far more powerful, the woman noticed. She cut down another attacker before stepping between Ethan and the next soldier. Her movements flowed like water, shielding him without breaking her rhythm. He realized she was not just fighting for herself now. She was fighting to keep him alive. That knowledge settled heavily in his chest, tightening something deep inside him. The commander barked another order, and the soldiers pulled back slightly. Ethan thought they might be retreating, but the truth came seconds later. From the rear of the formation, a massive figure stepped forward. Its armor was thicker, its height towering over the others. It carried a weapon unlike any Ethan had ever seen, long, curved, and glowing with a red core. Even the woman's expression hardened. At the sight of it, she shifted her stance, lowering her blade slightly. Ethan could feel the change in the air, as if both fighters were drawing from reserves they had been holding back. The towering soldier advanced slowly, each step deliberate. The ground seemed to tremble with the weight of his movements. The other soldiers formed a circle, sealing off any path of escape. Ethan's grip on the cylinder tightened, the hum of the device behind him now matching the pounding of his own heartbeat. The woman took one step forward, her eyes locked on her new opponent. For the first time, she glanced back at Ethan. No words were spoken, but the meaning was unmistakable. She was telling him to be ready for whatever came next. And in that moment, Ethan knew that whatever this fight meant to her, it was no longer just hers, it was his too. The towering soldier stopped just a few steps away from the alien woman. His armor gave off a dull red glow, the light running like molten veins along the plating. The weapon in his hands hummed with a deep resonance, the kind that made Ethan's chest feel heavy. The woman stood still, her blade angled low, her gaze locked on him. Every muscle in her body was ready to spring into motion. The first strike came without warning. The massive soldier swung his weapon in a wide arc, the red light trailing behind like a burning line. She met the blow with her blade, the clash ringing out like struck steel. The impact forced her back a step, but she did not falter. Ethan's eyes followed every movement, his heart pounding with each exchange. The fight was unlike anything he had seen before. The woman shifted her footing, moving with speed that seemed impossible against such a large opponent. She struck low, her blade sliding under his guard, but his armor absorbed the blow. Sparks flew, and he countered with a downward slash that sent her rolling to the side. She came up on one knee, ready again before he could close the distance. The sound of the humming red core filled the yard like a warning. Ethan's grip on the glowing cylinder tightened. He could see that her attacks alone would not be enough to pierce the heavy armor. The thought of stepping in made his stomach twist, but the idea of watching her lose was worse. His mind flashed back to the moment she had shielded him earlier. If she fell here, everything would be over. The device in the container seemed to pulse in sync with the fear rising in his chest. The soldier pressed forward, each strike shaking the ground. She met him blow for blow, her movements sharp and unyielding. For every attack he made, she found an angle to counter, but it was clear the battle was wearing on her. Her breathing grew heavier, her strikes more deliberate. The soldiers surrounding them stayed still, watching as if this duel determined everything. Ethan moved closer to the edge of the circle. His steps were slow, careful, the cylinder still clutched in his hand. The massive soldier turned slightly at the movement, and the woman used the distraction to strike. Her blade cut through a weak joint in his armor, sending a burst of sparks into the air. The soldier staggered but did not fall. His weapon lashed out, catching her across the side and sending her sprawling into the dirt. She rolled to her feet quickly, but Ethan saw the wince in her movement. The blow had landed harder than she wanted to show. The towering soldier advanced again, his shadow falling over her. Without thinking, Ethan stepped forward into the circle. The woman's eyes widened for a brief moment, before narrowing again. She barked something at him in her language, but he didn't stop. His fingers wrapped tighter around the cylinder. As he moved toward her, the towering soldier shifted his attention toward Ethan. The weapon in his hands glowed brighter, the hum deepening into a dangerous vibration. Ethan's heartbeat pounded in his ears, but his feet did not stop. The woman lunged forward to intercept the blow aimed at him, her blade catching the strike just before it connected. The force of it drove her to one knee, but it gave Ethan the moment he needed. He raised the cylinder and struck it against the soldier's armor. A surge of golden light exploded outward, flooding the yard. The sound was like the crack of thunder, and the massive figure staggered back as if struck by an unseen force. The red glow along his armor flickered and dimmed. Ethan's arm ached from the impact, but the soldier's footing faltered for the first time. The woman was on him instantly. Her blade moved in a swift arc, cutting deep into the same joint she had struck earlier. This time, the metal gave way. The towering soldier dropped to one knee, his weapon falling from his grasp. She stepped forward, pressing the attack until the red light along his armor finally faded to nothing. The rest of the soldiers shifted uneasily, their formation breaking for the first time. The woman turned to Ethan, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. There was no smile, no spoken thanks, but her eyes held something different. A recognition. Acknowledgement that he had stood beside her when it mattered. Without a word, she took the cylinder from his hand and clipped it back to her belt. Then, she glanced at the remaining soldiers, her posture daring them to move. None did. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the device still active in the container. Ethan knew the fight wasn't over, but for now, they had won this moment. The woman gave him one last look, then turned toward the container, as if the next step in their journey was already decided. The remaining soldiers began to retreat slowly, their leader giving sharp hand signals as they backed toward the armored vehicles. Their boots crunched against the gravel, and their eyes flicked between the woman and Ethan. No one dared turn their back completely. The towering soldier lay motionless where he had fallen, his armor cooling to a dull gray. The air smelled of dust, metal, and something faintly burnt. The alien woman stepped past Ethan without a word, moving toward the container. Her blade was still in her hand, but her grip had eased. She reached the doorway and paused, scanning the yard one last time. Satisfied that no further attack was coming, she entered the shadowed interior. Ethan followed, the hum of the strange device pulling him forward. It still pulsed with golden light, steady and strong. Inside, she moved to the device and touched its surface lightly. The glow brightened, and the hum deepened into a smoother tone. She opened one of the side panels again, checking the crystals and lines within. Ethan stood beside her, watching the way her eyes tracked every detail. He could tell that the machine was more than a tool to her. It was something she needed to protect at all costs. She spoke then, her voice calmer than before. Though he still couldn't understand her words, the change in tone was clear. This was no longer the sharp command of a battlefield. This was explanation, perhaps even trust. She gestured to the device, then pointed toward the sky, tracing a slow line as if drawing a path among the stars. Ethan's eyes followed her hand, realizing she was telling him it was meant to go somewhere far beyond this place. She moved to the crates, opening each one in turn. Inside were more of the glowing cylinders, pieces of armor, and small mechanical units shaped like discs. She handed him one of the discs, motioning for him to press it. The moment he did, it unfolded into a thin shield of shimmering light, large enough to cover his torso. He stared at it in disbelief, the edges humming faintly in his hands. She nodded once, a silent approval. Ethan strapped the shield to his arm as she pulled a small pack from another crate. She slung it across her shoulder, then began sealing the crates with a fluid movement. It was clear she was preparing to move, though where to was still a mystery. The hum of the device shifted again, and a soft chime rang through the container. She froze for half a second, then turned sharply toward him. Her eyes were alert, searching his face for readiness. A low vibration rolled through the ground. Not from engines this time, but from something deeper. The woman moved to the doorway, scanning the horizon. Ethan joined her, and saw faint shadows moving in the distance, several large shapes advancing quickly, their outlines blurred by the heat haze. Whatever was coming was bigger than the vehicles. From before, the yard, once silent, now felt like the center of something closing in. She turned back to him and spoke with a firmness that left no doubt. She pointed toward the device, then at him, and finally to the pack on her shoulder. The message was clear. Whatever this mission was, he was part of it now. His heart pounded, but he nodded. The soldiers from before had been dangerous enough. Yet it was obvious they were only the beginning. She returned to the device and placed both hands on its surface. The golden light flared, spilling into the container until it painted the walls in a warm glow. The floor beneath them shivered as the hum rose in pitch. Ethan felt the vibration in his bones, as if the machine was syncing with something deep inside him. His pulse matched its rhythm without him meaning it to. Outside, the shapes grew closer, resolving into towering machines that moved on 4 heavy legs. Their metallic bodies gleamed in the sunlight, and strange weapons protruded from their sides. The sight of them sent a sharp chill through Ethan's chest. He glanced at the woman, expecting her to tense, but instead, she exhaled slowly. Her gaze was steady, and her hand rested on the hilt of her blade. She was ready, and now, so was he. The towering machines advanced with a slow but unrelenting pace. Each step sent a faint tremor through the ground, shaking loose small pebbles. In the yard, sunlight flashed across their metallic surfaces, revealing rows of intricate panels that shifted as they moved. Ethan had never seen anything so imposing up close. The alien woman stood at the container's entrance, her posture unflinching as she watched them approach. The hum from the device behind them rose in pitch, as though sensing the incoming threat. The woman glanced over her shoulder, then back at the machines. She gave Ethan a quick signal with her hand before stepping toward the device again. Her fingers brushed over its surface with practiced precision, activating a sequence that caused its golden glow to intensify. The air around them seemed to warm, carrying a faint charge that made the hairs on his arms stand up. She turned to him and spoke in short, deliberate bursts. Her voice carried the tone of someone giving final instructions for a dangerous task. She pointed at the glowing cylinder on her belt, then to him, then toward the approaching machines. Even without understanding the words, Ethan knew she was telling him that what happened next would require both of them to act. His pulse quickened, but he gave a single nod. The first of the machines stopped at the edge of the yard. Panels on its sides unfolded, revealing weapon arrays that began to glow with a deep red light. A low, mechanical sound echoed from its frame, almost like a warning. Ethan took a step forward without realizing it, his grip tightening on the shield disc she had given him earlier. The woman moved to stand beside him, her presence a steady anchor in the growing tension. A sudden burst of energy shot from the machine's weapons, striking the ground near the container. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, forcing Ethan to brace himself. Dust and fragments of stone scattered across the yard. The woman reacted instantly, activating the device. Its golden light flared into a blinding radiance, forming a protective dome that shimmered against the red blasts. The hum deepened, steady and unbroken. The machines pressed forward, their weapons firing in rhythmic bursts. Each strike against the golden dome sent ripples through its surface, but it held firm. Ethan realized that the device was not just a tool or a weapon, it was a shield, one capable of protecting everything within its radius. The woman's eyes stayed locked on the largest of the machines, her expression focused and unyielding. She was waiting for the right moment to act. That moment came when one of the machines shifted its stance, exposing the glowing core beneath its armored chest. The woman's hand darted to her belt, pulling free the glowing cylinder. She tossed it to Ethan without hesitation. He caught it, feeling the familiar surge of energy pulse through his hand. She gave a single sharp nod before dashing out from under the dome. Ethan didn't hesitate. He followed, moving toward the exposed core as the woman engaged the machines, legs drawing its attention away from him. The hum of the device seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, pushing him forward. The ground shook beneath his feet, but he didn't slow. When he reached the machine, he raised the cylinder high and drove it into the glowing core with all his strength. A blast of golden energy erupted from the point of contact, spreading outward in a wave that struck all the machines at once. Their weapons fell silent, their glowing panels dimming to black. The towering frames trembled, then sank to the ground with a heavy finality. The yard was suddenly silent except for the fading hum of the device in the container. Ethan staggered back, the cylinder slipping from his grip. The woman approached, her blade still in hand but no longer raised. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. Then she reached out, clasping his forearm in a firm grip. The gesture needed no translation. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, and acceptance all in one. For the first time since he had met her, Ethan felt certain that they were no longer strangers bound by chance. They were allies. Without a word, she returned to the container and began securing the crates. Ethan followed, helping where he could. The golden light from the device began to fade, settling into a steady glow. Whatever lay ahead, he knew they would face it together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard, the two of them stepped away from the wreckage and toward the unknown horizon.